Naughty Clarence. Jeremiah Wilson was a proud and upstanding man. He worked hard, he always did what he thought to be the right thing, and he loved his family. That was why he felt so abashed when he came to realize that they were about to run out of coal for both the fireplace and stove. It was the week before Christmas, and what little money he had been able to save over the course of the previous months had already been spent on gifts for his wife and son, with the remainder held by the local butcher's shop as payment for the small goose he was due to collect that coming Tuesday, Christmas Eve. He could see no way to be able to afford more coal before his next wage packet, and that would not come until the new year. Finally, he admitted his concerns to his wife, Constance, as they sat at their dining table, having just enjoyed a modest dinner of vegetables, potatoes, and bread. Little Clarence, their 9-year-old son, loitered at the top of the stairs, listening to their conversation. Not usually prone to such eavesdropping, for a few days he had felt that something wasn't quite right, that his father had seemed troubled and nowhere near as much fun as usual. The goose, the gifts, he was explaining. I just don't know how I managed to get my sum so terribly wrong. Hush now, Constance replied softly. We shall still enjoy our Christmas, and so long as sweet Clarence will be happy with his gifts, then there is certainly no more I can ask of you, my dear. We may need to dress ourselves with another layer or two, and perhaps I can ask Mrs. Wiggins down the lane to cook the goose for us the day before, which I'm sure shall be just as nice cold as hot. But whatever happens, we will be together, and that is the only thing that really matters. Clarence, now sitting on the top step, rubbed his chin thoughtfully as he considered the situation. He knew that, even though his mother had meant what she said, and that it can't have been father's fault, still she would have been disappointed and a little bit sad to have to spend Christmas Day shivering as she ate cold cabbage and parsnips. But what could he do? Surely there must be something. He quietly went into his room, deciding he should give the matter some serious thought, for the moment ignoring the small, glittering Christmas wreath, the paper flowers and lace bags that decorated his walls. He didn't think he would be able to buy any coal. He knew he would be leaving school in 6 months' time, and would probably have little trouble in finding employment to contribute at least something to the household income, even if he went down to the mill or up a few chimneys. But that would be of little help over the next few days. But what if he left school now and did go to work at the cotton mill, or even in the mine? If he could find a week's work and earn 4 or 5 shillings, how much coal would that buy? He frowned, working it out in his head. If there were 20 shillings in a pound, and a pound would get you a month's worth of coal, then... He shook his head sadly and sighed. It might get me a few crumbs to last a week, he said aloud, standing and walking to the window. Looking out into the dark night, he noticed the decorations in the rooms of houses across the narrow, cobbled street. He saw trees adorned with candles, sweets, fruit, and handmade paper decorations, and as he looked, thinking about Christmas, he began to realize the first flicker of an idea. At first, he couldn't imagine it would work, and if it did, he would probably get into a great deal of trouble. That was something he wasn't sure he could even bring himself to do it, since he wasn't the kind of person who ever did that sort of thing. But then, if it meant helping father and mother and making Christmas all the better, then surely the idea wasn't all that bad after all. Wouldn't anything be worth that? He lay awake that night, going over the plans in his mind, wondering how many of them he might put into action. How many schemes would be enough? Although starting to feel nervous, he eventually drifted off to sleep, imaging how pleased his parents would be. Mr. Arkland was the village butcher, a rather plump gentleman with a bushy grey moustache who seemed to always be wearing his navy and white striped apron. He opened the door to his shop and looked up and down the snowy road. Every morning he took delivery from a cart containing crates of rump steaks, lamb and pork, and as he waited he noticed something amongst the cobbles. Thinking nothing of the fact that that part of the road looked as though it had been swept of its snowy covering, he bent over and smiled when he realized he had found 3 farthings that some poor soul must have dropped. He reached for them, but for some reason he could not pick them up. He stood and blew into his cold hands, thinking the crisp morning air might have lost him the feeling in his fingers. He tried again, but no, they remained fixed to the stones. Several other people stopped to see what he was doing, and beginning to feel slightly embarrassed, Mr. Arkland moved aside so that Mr. Wheatley, who had come out of his bakery, could take a turn. When he too was unable to move the coins, some of the others declared that they'd be able to manage it, each taking a turn and each failing. Eventually, Constable Ketchum, the young policeman who always wanted to help people as much as he could, and, having tried to extricate the farthings so many times that his fingers began to bleed, realized that they had actually been attached to the road with some kind of adhesive, most probably fish glue. Mr. Troutman reported that some was missing from his fishmongers just this morning, the constable said, so I wouldn't be surprised if that's the stuff. Mr. Wheatley, shaking his head and quietly giggling at the prank, returned to his bakery a few doors further along the road and continued preparing his mixture for the second batch of the morning's bread. The shop was decorated with sprigs of Christmas holly and mistletoe, and he had even managed to procure some red and green striped wrapping paper, and so, happily whistling jingle bells, he resumed what he had been doing before the intermission of the fastened farthings. He did not find it quite so amusing, however, when he realized he could not find his supply of germ flour, and so, growing concerned that his next batch of bread would not be ready in time, he looked everywhere for something that might serve as a suitable replacement. He looked beneath the counter, in the back room, on shelves, and in cupboards, trying as hard as he could to remember what he could have done with the flour. And then, almost hidden behind other, larger sacks of ingredients, he finally found it. Unfortunately, as he would only realize after it was too late, he discovered that the sack he had thought contained the germ flour was, in fact, holding a tainted combination of the flour and what he guessed was probably a large amount of sugar and salt. How the flour had come to be polluted in such a way, since he stored them in completely different places in the shop, was a complete mystery to him. Meanwhile, Mr. Troutman, the fishmonger, did not leave his shop to see what was happening further along the road. Instead, he was having a rather uncomfortable time, having already wasted much of the morning trying to find his stock of fish glue, which had somehow gone missing from his storage sheds at the rear of the shop. He had then decided to make himself some hot chocolate in an attempt to combat the freezing temperatures outside. However, unbeknownst to him, someone must have been inside his shop while he had been otherwise engaged and had exacerbated his cocoa powder with sawdust. Not noticing as he prepared the drink, since he was still preoccupied with trying to imagine what could have happened to his fish glue, it was only when he began imbibing the tainted mixture that he realized something was wrong. Needless to say, the effects of the concoction had a somewhat adverse effect on Mr. Troutman, who was then indisposed for much of the remainder of the day. When Constable Ketchum had finished gathering information about all of these somewhat strange and coincidental occurrences, he concluded that there must be some kind of mischief afoot. Surely, he thought, all of these events must be connected, and, therefore, there must be someone responsible. And so, the snow falling and the air chilling him almost to the bone, he began taking statements from all those who had been in the area at the time, making note of who else had been seen and what sounds had been heard. Eventually, as a thin, watery sunlight reached the cobbled streets, the snow glistening like diamonds, he decided that he had succeeded in piecing the whole story together. Constable Ketchum knocked at the door of the small, chilly house that sat at the end of Linen Lane, brushing snow from the shoulders of his uniform as he waited. "Yes?" a rather shivery woman said as she opened the door. "Oh, Constable Ketchum, hello there. Is there something I can help you with?" "I believes there is," the constable replied in his thick accent, accepting the woman's invitation to enter the dwelling, despite it feeling even colder indoors than it had in the streets outside. "Could you tell me," he began, refusing the offer of a cup of cold tea, "where your young Clarence has been all morning?" "Why, I should think he's been at school, as usual." Constable Ketchum shook his head. "I'm afraid to say," he said, "that I believes he has been up to a great deal more unpleasantness than learning the whys and whatnots of his 9 times tables." And then, as Constance sat down, a concerned expression on her face, the constable told her all about the glued farthings and the ruined bread and the discomfort of Mr. Troutman, and explained that his inquiries had resulted in the clear revelation that Clarence had been the one responsible for such boorish behaviour. "Even I fell for it," he said, as Constance covered her face with her hands. "There was I coming along to see you just now, when I spots a rather sorry-looking trilby just sitting there in the road, and, like you does, I gives it a bit of a kick, I does, just to pass the time. Not for me to know that some scallywag, and I think you and me both know who it is I be talking about, had hidden a house brick under and beneath it. Fair broke me foot, it did. "I'm so very sorry," Constance exclaimed, struggling not to break into embarrassed tears. "I really don't know what could have gotten into him. It really isn't like him, you know." "I knows that," Ketchum agreed. "Always been a kind and helpful little nipper, he has. And that's why, on this occasion, I shan't be taking things any further. That being, so long as you and Mr. Wilson sees to it that you have a proper serious chat with him, make sure you puts him back on the straight and narrow, afore things get even more out of hand. Perhaps some kind of reparations might also be considered, specially for poor Mr. Troutman, who has had some right old belly trouble, I can tell you, and Mr. Wheatley, whose morning bread went right down the Swanee." Yes, of course, thank you," Constance gushed, somewhat relieved. "But how can we make these restitutions when, as you can see and most likely feel, we don't have even enough money to buy coal for the fire?" "Having spoke with them all," Ketchum said, "and it being Christmas and all, they said they would be agreeable if young Clarence spent some time doing a bit of work for 'em all. Bit of fetching and carrying, bit of firm labour, you know. I think they just be wanting to get him to turn over a new leaf, nip this behaviour in the bud by working him hard till he sees the errors of his ways, so it were. Likes him, they does, and understand it's likely nothing more than just some ill-sighted buffoonery." Clarence was startled to find his father and mother standing in the kitchen waiting for him when he came into the house later that afternoon. They both looked very stern, and he swallowed hard as Constance said, "Clarence, your father has something important he wants to talk to you about." Clarence looked up at his father, who indicated that he ought to sit down at the table. "Now then," he said solemnly, hooking his thumbs into his waistcoat and standing even more upright. "What's all this we've been hearing about this trouble and tomfoolery you've been getting yourself into? And that's before we even begin talking about why you weren't at school today." "But," said Clarence pleadingly. No, his father said, holding up a hand. "I don't want to hear any excuses. Your poor mother, having the constable calling round telling her all the things you've been up to. How do you think that made her feel?" The tirade lasted several minutes longer, Clarence's father listing all the things that had happened without allowing his son to interject. Then, finally, he said, "So, what do you have to say for yourself, boy?" Clarence looked chastened, realizing that the things he had done had been, as his father had pointed out, both reckless and dangerous. He looked to his mother, who immediately turned her face away, and then he glanced around the kitchen at the dried cinnamon, apple and orange slices strung over the stove, the candles that stood by the window, and the hazel wreath decorated with pine cones that hung above the door. "It's Christmas," he said weakly. "And what of it?" snapped his father. "I'm sorry, father. I'm sorry, mother," Clarence said. "But I couldn't help but hear what you were saying the other day. It's Christmas and I wanted it to be special. To be as special as it always is. I just wanted you to be happy." His father cleared his throat, looked to Constance, and then, with slightly less irritation, asked, "But what does that have to do with all the things you've done? The trouble you've caused?" "It was the coal," Clarence explained. "I heard you say we couldn't afford any coal for Christmas, and even though I tried to think of a way to help that wouldn't be so naughty, I'm afraid to say that I could not. But I did try, I really did." "But how would such dreadful behavior lead to you finding coal?" his mother asked, now sounding more appeasing, placing a hand on Clarence's shoulder. "Because of Father Christmas," he replied, pointing to the small, lacquered figurine on the kitchen table. "I didn't want to be naughty, and I know the things I did were wrong, and I will do everything I can to make amends to everyone, but I had no choice." "What on earth do you mean?" Constance asked. "Father Christmas," Clarence said again. "I had to be naughty so that he would bring me some coal on Christmas Day, so we can warm the house and so that we can have our roast goose and cabbage and all those other nice things. I just wanted Christmas to be as splendid as it always is." As he spoke, he began to cry, and his mother immediately wrapped her arms around him. "Oh, Clarence," she said, "that's very sweet. Of course, you shouldn't have done all those wicked things, and you will have to make things right with everyone, but it was a very sweet thought. And it will be a splendid Christmas because the three of us shall be together, and there is nothing finer. Nothing I would like more than that. So, come along," she continued. "Let's dry those tears and get on with our celebrations. There are still a few decorations for us to make, and we'll say nothing more about all of this until after Christmas has passed. Oh, Clarence," she finished, rubbing his arm, "what are we going to do with you?" On Christmas morning, as the snow fell outside and a meek sun peeked through the clouds, Clarence awoke and looked around his room. There, in the corner, sat a white cotton pillowcase, and, rushing to open it, he found a single small piece of coal inside. Going downstairs, he noticed the house felt warmer than it had for several days, and approaching the kitchen, he found his mother leaning into the oven as she checked the goose. Mr. Burnsworth, the local coal merchant, had heard all about Clarence's mischievous jappery and his reasons for it, and, filled with the spirit of the season, had supplied the Wilsons with enough coal to see them through the festivities. "Happy Christmas, my dear," Constance said cheerfully as she noticed Clarence standing in the doorway. "The goose is coming along rather well." "It worked?" Clarence asked brightly. "Father Christmas brought the coal?" His father came into the kitchen and, standing behind him, winked at Constance. "Perhaps he did," he said, "and perhaps next year we'll try not to be quite so naughty. In the meantime, happy Christmas, son. Happy Christmas."